Hello, peaceful soul. I'm your storyteller this evening, here to help you unwind and drift into a gentle, restful sleep. Before we begin our journey, remember to like the video and subscribe for more calming bedtime tales. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And if there's a story you'd love to hear next, I'd be happy to bring it to life. My name is George Prescott. I worked as an overnight stocker in the frozen food section at Walmart for over 10 years. My job was straightforward: unpack pallets of frozen goods and get them onto the shelves. It's a cold job, literally. The freezers hum constantly, and the air always smells faintly of ice and plastic. You spend hours alone, surrounded by towering walls of boxes and the ghostly glow of the freezer lights. Most people don't think much about a job like this, but when you're deep in the back, the cold can get into your head and the silence can stretch until it feels like it's screaming. But here is what keeps me coming back year after year, despite the constant danger and isolation, the things you only see when everyone else is asleep. The night I saw a customer who was definitely not a customer, moving too slowly and staring too hard, I knew my shifts would never be the same. It was a particularly bitter January night, about 2:45 a.m. I was in the back corner of the frozen foods aisle, stocking bags of mixed vegetables. The air was thick with the scent of frost and stale cardboard. My breath plumed white in front of me with every exhale. The only sounds were the low thrum of the freezer units and the occasional squeak of my utility cart wheels. The rest of the store was a vast, silent expanse of dimness, lit only by emergency lights and my headlamp. It was the typical quiet of a deep night shift. I was just trying to get through my duties, listening to an old podcast through one earbud. Then I saw a shape at the far end of the aisle. It was a person standing perfectly still, facing away from me. This was wrong. No customers were allowed in the store at this hour, and all employees were accounted for. I pulled out my earbud. My heart gave a little jolt. "Hey!" I called out, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet. "Store's closed. Can I help you?" The figure didn't move. It was wearing what looked like an old dark coat, too big for its frame. It stood by the ice cream freezer, absolutely motionless. I told myself it was probably just another stalker, maybe someone from a different department who had wandered over. Maybe they didn't hear me. But a few minutes later, it happened again. The figure was still there, but now it was slowly turning. Very, very slowly. Like a clock's minute hand, but barely moving at all. It was an unnatural movement, too smooth, too quiet. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. My blood ran cold, despite the heavy winter coat I wore. I could feel a knot tightening in my stomach. This wasn't another stalker. They would have answered. They would have moved normally. This felt off. The air around me suddenly felt much heavier, colder than the freezer aisle itself, almost like a presence. I watched, frozen in place, as the figure continued its slow turn, its head slowly angled upwards. I realized it was staring at the ceiling, or maybe through it. It kept turning, its dark form a stark contrast against the white freezers. The silence in the aisle grew deeper, heavier. Even the hum of the freezers seemed to fade into the background. I could feel my pulse throbbing in my ears. I reached for the walkie-talkie on my belt, but my hand was shaking so badly I couldn't grasp it properly. I needed to call my supervisor, but I couldn't break my gaze from the slowly turning figure. Suddenly, the figure stopped turning. It was now facing me, completely. But it wasn't just facing me. Its head was still tilted upwards at a strange angle, looking at the ceiling, even though its body was pointed directly at me. It stood there, unmoving, for what felt like an eternity. I couldn't see a face, just a dark, indistinct blur beneath the brim of what looked like an old, tattered hat. Then I heard a sound, a faint, wet scraping, like fingernails dragging across glass. It seemed to come from the figure, and then, from its raised head, a single, raspy whisper tore through the quiet, a sound like dry leaves rustling. "Are you cold?" The words were drawn out, distorted, filled with a deep, chilling emptiness, and as it spoke, I saw something shift in the dark void where its face should have been. A faint, sickly green glow pulsed from within the shadows, like two deep-set, sickly green eyes. They looked ancient, full of a terrible hunger. They were not eyes I had ever seen on a living person. My blood turned to ice. My body locked up. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. Those glowing green eyes, set in that impossibly tilted head, seemed to bore into my soul. They held me captive. The scraping sound grew louder, more frantic, like something trying to break free from inside its throat. I felt a cold, unseen pressure push against my chest, making it hard to breathe. The figure then slowly started to raise one arm. Its movement was still agonizingly slow, but purposeful. Its hand, covered by the dark coat sleeve, was coming up, pointing directly at me. Then, with a sudden, sharp crack, the figure's head snapped forward, hanging limp on its neck. The green lights vanished. It stood there, a dark, slumped form, completely still again. The silence returned, but it was a suffocating, terrifying silence. The spell broke. My legs finally worked. I dropped the bags of vegetables in my walkie-talkie, turning and running as fast as I could. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I burst into the supervisor's office, gasping for air, trembling uncontrollably. I called in sick for a week after that. I told my supervisor I saw someone who wasn't supposed to be there, but I didn't describe the tilted head or the glowing eyes. He just said it was probably a homeless person who snuck in and got out before I could catch them. But I know what I saw. I still work the night shift at Walmart, but I avoid the frozen food section whenever possible. Every time I pass that aisle, I feel a prickle on the back of my neck. And sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment, I can almost hear that raspy whisper, "Are you cold?" And I swear I feel a sudden, deep chill, no matter how warm the room is. That place, that dark, empty Walmart, showed me that some things in the cold silence are not just human, and they leave a lingering chill that follows you home. My name is Madison Walker. I worked as an overnight cashier at Walmart for 15 years. My job was usually simple: ring up items for the few odd people who shopped late, then count the money and prepare the tills for the morning. Most people think a night cashier job is easy, just sitting there. But you see the strangest parts of humanity when the world goes to sleep. The drifters, the insomniacs, the people with secrets in their eyes. The whole store feels different at night. The lights are dim, the aisles are empty. It's like a ghost town. But sometimes you get a customer who isn't just strange, but unsettling. One customer, a woman, made me believe that some people might not be people at all, but something else entirely. She showed me a side of the world I wish I could unsee. It was a quiet Friday night, around 1:15 a.m. A light drizzle tapped against the storefront windows. I was the only cashier on duty, sitting at Register 3. The air was still and smelled faintly of old coffee and cleaning products. I was counting the last few bills in my till, getting ready to close it down for the night, when the automatic doors at the entrance hissed open. A woman stepped inside. She was old, with her hair pulled back tightly in a bun, wearing a dark, old-fashioned dress and carrying a large, worn canvas bag. Her face was pale, almost gray, and her eyes were wide, unblinking. It was normal to see older people shopping late, so I just smiled faintly. She walked straight to my register, her steps silent on the polished floor. She didn't have a shopping cart, which was a little unusual. She just carried that single, heavy-looking bag. She placed it gently on the counter. "Just this," she said, her voice a dry whisper, like rustling paper. I nodded, about to ask her if she found everything she needed, but she just stared at me with those wide, unblinking eyes. Her gaze felt heavy, like a physical weight. My instincts gave a small tug, a feeling that something was a little off, but I dismissed it. Maybe she was just tired or a bit confused. It happens with older customers. Then, as I reached for the bag to scan its contents, I saw it. The woman's hand. It was thin and bony, but her fingernails were unnaturally long, yellowed and curled slightly at the ends, like talons. And beneath the sleeve of her dress, I caught a glimpse of something dark. A patch of skin that looked less like human skin and more like rough, dry scales. My hand froze in midair. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. My heart began to pound a frantic rhythm in my chest. This wasn't just an old woman. This was something else. Her unblinking eyes never left my face. Her mouth, a thin line, slowly curved into a small, unsettling smile. It didn't reach her eyes. It was a smile that felt cold, empty. The air around the register felt thick, suddenly heavy with an unspoken threat. The faint hum of the store lights seemed to dim, and the store felt colder than before. Could feel a cold sweat break out on my forehead. My throat felt tight. I couldn't speak. I just stared at her hand, and then back at her pale, unmoving face. The old woman let out a soft, dry chuckle. It was a sound like gravel grinding together, completely devoid of warmth. "Aren't you going to scan my items, dear?" she whispered, her voice still raspy, but with a new edge to it, a hint of something ancient and knowing. She then slowly, deliberately reached her scaly hand into her canvas bag. My eyes were fixed on that hand. The nails seemed to elongate even more as she dug into the bag. I could hear a soft scraping sound coming from within the bag, a faint rustle of what felt like dry leaves, or perhaps something organic. She pulled out a single item. It wasn't a product from Walmart. It was a small, crudely carved wooden doll, no bigger than my palm. It looked very old, made of dark, gnarled wood with 2 black buttons for eyes. It looked like something from a horror movie, not something a customer would bring to checkout. As she placed it on the counter, the doll's button eyes seemed to glint in the dim light. I gasped, a small, choked sound. Then, as I stared at the doll, the woman leaned forward, her face just inches from mine. Her breath was cold, smelling of earth and something metallic. "This is a gift," she whispered, her voice now a low hiss. "For the lonely ones, for those who stay too long in the empty places." And then, the doll's black button eyes slowly, impossibly, rotated to look at me. A faint, almost imperceptible whisper, like the rustle of leaves in a graveyard, seemed to emanate from the doll itself, saying my name, Madison. My body erupted in pure, raw terror. I screamed, a high-pitched, desperate sound that echoed through the empty store. I shoved myself back from the register, my chair scraping loudly on the floor as I fell backward, scrambling away. I didn't care about the money, the till, anything. I just wanted to be away from that woman, away from that doll. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding like a drum, and ran towards the back room, towards the security office, screaming for help. I glanced back once and saw the old woman still standing at the register, her unblinking eyes still fixed on me, a faint, chilling smile on her dry lips. The little wooden doll sat on the counter, its button eyes still turned towards me. I quit Walmart the very next day. I couldn't go back, not after that. My supervisor thought I had a breakdown, that the late hours had finally gotten to me. But I know what I saw. I know what that woman was. Even now, years later, I can't walk past a toy store without feeling a shiver. And sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I hear a faint, dry chuckle. I swear I catch glimpses of dark, scaly hands in the shadows of my peripheral vision. That night, Walmart showed me that some things are not meant to be bought or sold, and some customers are not meant to be served. And I'm terrified that one day I'll find a small, crudely carved wooden doll with button eyes waiting for me on my doorstep. My name is Daniel O'Connell. I've been a manager on the overnight shift at Walmart for almost 20 years. My job is to keep everything running, deal with staff, handle any emergencies. You see a lot of strange things when you manage a Walmart at night. Shoplifters, odd customers, sometimes even people trying to live in the store. You learn to expect the unexpected. But you never expect the store itself to become a problem. You never expect the building to have a voice or a presence. The place becomes a different entity once the doors are locked and the lights dim. It holds secrets. But I never imagined it could hold a secret like the one I found in the old employee break room. A secret that made me question everything I thought I knew about the building and about my own sanity. It was a particularly quiet Saturday night, just past 3 a.m. I was doing my usual rounds, checking on the stockers, making sure the cleaning crew was on schedule. The store felt eerily still, the kind of quiet where every distant hum of the refrigerators and every creak of the floorboards sounds amplified. There was a faint, metallic smell from the floor wax we'd used earlier, mixed with the ever-present scent of stale popcorn from the front. I decided to check on the old employee break room, tucked away in the very back, near the loading docks. It was rarely used anymore, most people preferring the newer, brighter one near the front. As I approached the break room, I heard a faint, rhythmic scratching sound coming from inside. It was very soft, like chalk on a blackboard, but muffled. I paused at the door, listening. Mouse, I thought, just like everyone else always did. Or maybe one of the maintenance guys had left something rubbing against the wall. I pushed the heavy door open. The room was dark, except for the dim glow of an emergency light. The scratching stopped as soon as the door opened. I flicked on the main lights. Nothing. Just empty tables, old lockers, and a dusty microwave. I shook my head, convinced it was just my imagination, or the building settling. I figured I'd heard a mouse. But as I turned to leave, the scratching started again. This time, it was louder, more urgent. It wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from one of the old metal lockers along the back wall. Specifically, the one at the very end, number 13. My heart began to thump a little harder in my chest. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. This wasn't a mouse. The sound was too steady, too deliberate. It was like something was trapped inside, clawing at the metal from the inside, desperate to get out. The air in the small room felt suddenly heavy, cold. I slowly walked towards locker 13. Each step felt incredibly heavy. The scratching continued, a frantic, rhythmic sound. It was like a message being tapped out, or an animal trying to dig its way through steel. As I got closer, I heard something else, a faint, almost inaudible whispering, like the sound of dry leaves rustling close to my ear. It was coming from inside the locker. It wasn't words, not yet, just a low, constant murmur, like a swarm of insects, but it was too deep, too guttural to be insects. The whispers seemed to be building, twisting, trying to form something coherent. My hand trembled as I reached out, my fingers just inches from the cold, scratched metal of the locker door. Then, from inside the locker, a loud, sharp thud echoed. It was like something heavy had slammed against the inside of the door. The scratching stopped for a second, then resumed with even more frantic force. The whispering intensified, becoming a low, guttural chanting. It wasn't in English or any language I recognized. It was ancient, primal, full of a terrifying hunger. And then, a single word, perfectly clear, ripped through the whispers, screaming from within the locker, "Leave!" It was a man's voice, deep and raw, filled with pain and fury. It echoed in the small room, making the hair on my arms stand on end. I stumbled back, my heart racing, nearly tripping over a chair. My eyes were wide with terror, fixed on locker 13. The metallic door suddenly bowed outwards, a loud, groaning creak of stressed metal. A faint, sickening smell like old, dried blood and damp earth wafted from the locker. I saw a small, dark crack appear on the locker door, right where the voice had come from, and a tiny wisp of dark, inky smoke seemed to seep out of it. The locker was vibrating, shaking with an unseen force. The chanting inside grew louder, more distorted, as if multiple voices were now joining in, all screaming that one word, "Leave! Leave! Leave!" The bowing in the door increased, and the metal started to tear. The air grew impossibly cold, and I could see my breath again. I saw a flash of something dark and slender pushing against the crack, like a long finger trying to pry it open from the inside. The screams of "Leave!" became so loud they felt like they were inside my head, tearing at my sanity. I didn't wait to see what was trying to break out of locker 13. I spun around, my legs burning, and ran. I burst out of the break room, slamming the door shut behind me, not caring about the noise. I ran through the back room, past the loading docks, and didn't stop until I was out in the fresh, cold night air, gasping and shivering. I never opened locker 13 again. I never told anyone what I heard, what I saw, what I felt. The next day, I had maintenance weld the locker shut. They asked why, and I just mumbled something about it being old and broken. I still work at Walmart, but I avoid the old break room like the plague. Every time I walk past that part of the back room, I feel a prickle of cold air, and sometimes, in the deepest quiet of the night, I hear a faint, metallic scratching. And every so often, when I'm alone, I hear a whisper, "Leave." It's like the locker found a way to speak to me even when I'm far away. That Walmart changed me. It showed me that some places are not just buildings. They're prisons for things that should never have been locked away. My name is Area Brooks. I was a night shift cleaner at Walmart for almost 5 years. My job was to clean the bathrooms, sweep the aisles, and generally make the place presentable for the morning rush. Most people don't think much of cleaning. It's quiet work, often alone. You see the store in its rawest form, after everyone has gone home, left their messes behind. You get used to the strange smells, the quiet hum of the building, but sometimes the silence can hide things, and the reflections in the polished floors can show you more than just your own tired face. The night I saw a distorted reflection of something that wasn't there, moving too fast in the empty store, I knew some things weren't just dirt. It was a warm summer night, just after 2 a.m. I was in aisle 10, pushing my industrial floor scrubber. The store was mostly dark, with only emergency lights and the occasional aisle light providing a dim glow. The air smelled of fresh floor cleaner and faint, lingering popcorn. The scrubber hummed loudly, its brushes whirring against the polished concrete. It was a monotonous job, but I liked the quiet, the feeling of having the vast store to myself. My eyes were usually fixed on the floor, watching the dirty water swirl into the scrubber's tank, creating a clean, shining path behind me. As I worked my way down the aisle, I noticed something odd in the reflection of the freshly wet floor, a dark, blurry shape in the distance at the very end of the aisle. It moved quickly, a fleeting shadow, too fast for a person. I stopped the scrubber, the sudden silence deafening. I looked up, down the long empty aisle. Nothing, just shelves filled with household goods stretching into the dimness. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. Must be tired, I mumbled to myself, or maybe a trick of the light from a distant emergency exit sign. I started the scrubber again, trying to shake off the unease. It was probably just my eyes playing tricks, but a few minutes later, as I continued cleaning, I saw it again. This time, it was closer, clearer in the reflection. A tall, impossibly thin figure, moving with a jerky, unnatural speed. It was rushing down aisle 10, but when I looked up, the aisle was still empty. My heart leaped into my throat. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. This wasn't a trick of the light. This wasn't my imagination. The figure was there in the reflection, but nowhere in reality. It was a dark, distorted version of a human shape, stretched and twisted, its limbs moving at an impossible pace. I froze, gripping the handles of the scrubber. The rhythmic hum of the machine felt like a heartbeat, pounding in my ears. The figure in the reflection was now almost at the end of the aisle, approaching the point where my reflection was. It wasn't just moving fast, it was glitching, like a bad video signal, appearing and disappearing in flashes across the wet floor. And then I saw its head. It was tilted at an unnatural angle, and its face, if it had one, was a swirling vortex of darkness. It felt like it was moving towards me. Suddenly, the figure in the reflection paused directly in front of my own reflection. It stood there, shimmering in the wet floor, its dark form a mirror image of my terrified face. But where my reflection stood still, the other figure's head slowly, unnervingly tilted further. Then, from the darkness where its face should have been, 2 pinpricks of bright, malevolent red light appeared. They were like tiny, burning embers, staring out from the distorted reflection directly into my eyes. The red eyes flared, and the figure in the reflection began to move again, not walking, but gliding, rushing towards my reflection. It was closing the distance quickly, a silent, terrifying charge. I screamed, a raw, desperate sound that tore from my throat. I let go of the scrubber, stumbling backward, away from the horrifying reflection. The scrubber, left unattended, continued to move forward for a few feet, its brushes still whirring, before it veered off and crashed into a shelf of paper towels with a loud thud, scattering rolls everywhere. I didn't care. My eyes were still fixed on the wet floor. The distorted reflection was gone. The red eyes were gone, just the clean, wet floor reflecting the dim emergency lights. But the feeling of those eyes, that dark, charging figure, lingered. I scrambled away, my legs shaking, and didn't stop until I was out of the store, gasping for air in the cool night. I quit the cleaning job the next week. I couldn't bring myself to push that scrubber down the aisles again, watching my reflection. Every polished floor, every reflective surface, now brings a surge of fear. Sometimes I catch a glimpse of a dark, fleeting shadow in my car window at night, or in the glass of my living room mirror. I still avoid looking too long into reflections, especially in the dark. That Walmart changed me. It showed me that some things exist not in the world we see, but in the world that reflects us, and sometimes those reflections are not friendly. My name is Greg Hayes. I worked in the receiving department at Walmart for over 7 years. My job was unloading trucks, organizing the back room, and moving merchandise to the sales floor. It's a loud job, with forklifts, pallet jacks, and the constant roar of truck engines. You spend a lot of time in the loading docks, open to the elements, and in the cavernous back room. You get used to strange noises, the echoes of the cavernous space. But what you don't expect is silence where there should be noise, or a voice when no one is around. The night I heard a voice call my name from an empty truck, I knew the back dock of Walmart was holding more than just merchandise. It was a particularly windy night in late winter, around 3:30 a.m. I was the only one on the receiving dock. A large 18-wheeler had just pulled up, and I was waiting for the driver to finish his paperwork so I could start unloading. The wind howled outside, rattling the metal doors of the dock. Inside the back room, the usual sounds of forklifts and pallet jacks were absent, as everyone else was on break or out on the sales floor. The air smelled of diesel fumes and damp cardboard. I was leaning against a stack of empty pallets, scrolling through my phone, trying to escape the cold for a moment. Then, a faint, rhythmic knocking started coming from inside the truck trailer. Thump, 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 thump. It was quiet, steady. I straightened up, confused. Driver must be moving around in there, I mumbled to myself. Maybe he was just checking his load or getting something. It was a bit odd, though, to still be in the trailer after parking. I waited for a few minutes, expecting the knocking to stop or the driver to emerge. But it continued. That soft, insistent thump, thump. I shrugged it off, figuring he had a strange way of passing the time. But a few minutes later, the knocking changed. It became faster, more desperate. Thump, 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 thump. And then I heard it. A faint, muffled voice from inside the trailer, barely audible over the wind and the truck's idling engine. It was calling my name. Grieg. It was drawn out, distorted, like someone struggling for breath, trapped. My blood ran cold. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. There was no one else in that truck. The driver was supposed to be in the office. This wasn't right. I slowly walked towards the back of the trailer, my boots echoing on the concrete floor. The air around the truck felt noticeably colder, and a strange metallic tang, like old blood, reached my nose. The frantic knocking continued, now accompanied by a faint scraping sound, like fingernails against the inner walls of the trailer. The voice grew louder, more desperate, clearer this time. "Greg, help me!" It was a man's voice, raw with terror. My hand trembled as I reached for the trailer door handle, debating whether to open it. Then, from inside the trailer, a loud, guttural scream tore through the metal. It was a sound of pure agony and despair, cutting off abruptly, replaced by a wet, sickening thud. The frantic knocking stopped immediately. The voice was gone. A sudden, heavy silence descended upon the loading dock, broken only by the howling wind and the distant hum of the idling truck engine. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. My mind screamed at me to run, but my feet felt rooted to the ground. I stared at the closed trailer door, knowing that whatever had been making those sounds was now silent, and that silence was more terrifying than any scream. I imagined what could have caused that thud, that cut-off scream. I could almost smell the fear, the blood, even through the thick metal. Then, a low, soft scraping sound started again from inside the trailer. It was much slower this time, deliberate, and then, from the bottom edge of the trailer door, I saw it. A dark, viscous liquid began to seep out from beneath the door, forming a small spreading puddle on the concrete. It was thick, almost black, and it smelled faintly of iron and something deeply, sickeningly sweet. It looked like old, congealed blood. My stomach churned. My breath hitched. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the spreading puddle. Then, from the very center of the puddle, a single, pale, blood-covered human finger slowly, impossibly, pushed its way out from under the trailer door. It twitched once, twice, before going still. It was missing a nail. I screamed, a sound of pure horror and revulsion. I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet, scrambling away from the truck, away from the spreading puddle and that horrifying finger. I ran, not caring where I was going, just away from that truck, away from that dock. I burst into the supervisor's office, gasping, shaking, barely able to speak. I told them I heard strange noises and saw something coming from under the truck, but I couldn't bring myself to describe the finger or the blood. They checked the truck, but found nothing. No blood, no body, no sign of forced entry. The driver said he had been in the office the whole time. They thought I was hallucinating from lack of sleep. I quit that job a week later. I couldn't go back to the loading dock. Every time I see a semi-truck on the highway, I feel a prickle of dread. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I hear a faint knocking and a raw voice calling my name from the darkness outside my window. That Walmart changed me. It showed me that some trucks deliver more than just merchandise, and some shipments are meant for the grave. My name is Isabella Cooper. I was an overnight replenishment associate at Walmart for 2 years. My job was to stock the apparel section: clothes, shoes, accessories. It was usually pretty quiet. Just me and the mannequins. They're kind of creepy on their own when the store's empty, staring with their blank faces. You get used to them. You learn to ignore the feeling of being watched when there's no one else around. But the night a mannequin moved and then looked at me, I knew some things were not just plastic and metal. That night showed me that the store had its own kind of residents, and they weren't always human. It was a chilly night in late autumn, around 1 a.m. I was in the women's clothing section, hanging up a new shipment of sweaters. The fluorescent lights were dimmed in this part of the store, casting long, eerie shadows from the clothing racks. The air smelled of new fabric and dust. The only sound was the soft rustle of hangers and the distant hum of the building. I was singing softly to myself, trying to fill the vast silence. It was a normal, uneventful start to my shift. As I moved down an aisle, placing sweaters on a display, I noticed something odd. One of the mannequins, a female model dressed in a brightly colored dress, seemed to be standing a little differently. Its arm, usually held straight by its side, was now bent at the elbow, its hand slightly raised as if reaching. I stopped, staring. Did I do that? I wondered aloud. I sometimes bumped them while working. I shrugged, figuring I must have accidentally jostled it earlier. I finished hanging the sweaters, then walked past the mannequin, giving its arm a gentle push to straighten it. It felt stiff, normal, just a mannequin. But a few minutes later, as I was working in the next aisle, I glanced back. The mannequin's arm was bent again, and this time its head was tilted slightly to the side, looking towards me. My heart began to beat faster. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. I hadn't touched it since I straightened it, and its head was definitely not tilted before. It felt like it was watching me. The air around me suddenly felt cold, heavy, like a presence was near. The feeling of being watched intensified, making the hairs on my neck stand up. I slowly walked back towards the mannequin, my steps hesitant. Each step felt incredibly heavy. The mannequin stood there, unmoving, its blank face still staring in my direction, its head tilted. I stopped a few feet away, my eyes fixed on it. The arm was still bent, the head was still tilted. My hand trembled as I reached out, hesitantly, towards its plastic arm. I wanted to straighten it again, to prove to myself that it was just a static object. Then, as my fingers were just about to touch its plastic arm, it moved. Not its arm, its head. It slowly, deliberately rotated further, its blank face now directly aimed at mine, and then, from its painted eyes, a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer of dark red light pulsed deep within the plastic. It was like embers glowing faintly from within, and from its expressionless mouth I heard a faint, dry whisper. "Hello." My blood ran cold. My body locked up in pure, raw terror. The mannequin, a supposedly lifeless object, had moved, and it had spoken. And its eyes, those dark red embers pulsed again, staring into my soul. I could feel a cold, unseen pressure pressing against me, an overwhelming sense of malevolence. The entire store seemed to fall silent, amplifying the horrifying whisper, the heavy feeling in the air. The mannequin then slowly raised its bent arm higher. Its hand, plastic and unmoving, slowly curled, its fingers reaching towards me. It was not a friendly gesture. It was a gesture of claiming, of hunger. The dark red shimmer in its eyes intensified, burning brighter, deeper. I could almost hear a faint, high-pitched scratching sound, like plastic on plastic, coming from inside its head. I screamed, a primal sound of pure terror. I stumbled backward, falling over a display stand, sending clothes scattering across the floor. I scrambled away on my hands and knees, my eyes fixed on the mannequin. It stood there, unmoving again, its arm still raised, its blank face now staring directly at the spot where I had fallen. The red shimmer in its eyes slowly faded, leaving only the painted, empty eyes behind. I didn't wait. I got to my feet, my legs shaking, and ran. I ran through the apparel section, through the main aisles, not caring about the noise, not caring about anything but getting out. I didn't stop until I burst out of the emergency exit at the back, gasping, shivering, into the cold night air. I quit my job the next day. I never went back into that Walmart. I couldn't. Even now, years later, I can't walk past a store with mannequins without feeling a shiver of dread. I avoid looking at them, avoid being alone in any store after dark. And sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment, I hear a faint, dry whisper, "Hello," and I swear, in the dim light, I catch a flicker of dark red in the corner of my eye, a fleeting image of blank, plastic eyes staring at me from the shadows. That Walmart changed me. It showed me that some figures are not just for display. They are waiting for their moment to come alive, and they remember who saw them. My name is Benjamin Carter. I was a night stalker in the electronics department at Walmart for 6 years. My job was to unpack and arrange all the new TVs, video games, and computers. It's usually a pretty well-lit area with all the screens on display. But when the store is empty and only the emergency lights are on, it becomes a maze of dark reflections and flickering screens. You get used to the hum of the electronics, the faint smell of plastic and new wires. Most of the time, it's just quiet work with the occasional chime from a security system. But the night a TV turned on by itself, showing something that wasn't a channel, I knew the electronics section was more than just wires and circuits. It was a dark, stormy night in early spring, around 2:10 a.m. I was in the back corner of the electronics department, stocking a new shipment of sound bars. The wind howled outside, rattling the large plate glass windows at the front of the store. Inside, the store was mostly dark, save for a few emergency lights and the constant soft glow of the display televisions, which were usually left on standby, showing a black screen. The air smelled faintly of dust and ozone. The only sounds were the distant rumble of thunder and the soft static hum of the many dormant screens around me. As I was placing a sound bar on a shelf, I heard a faint click. I looked up, scanning the rows of televisions. One of the largest display TVs, a massive 80-inch model on the main wall, had just turned on. It wasn't showing a channel or a menu. It was displaying static, pure white noise hissing softly. I frowned. "That's odd," I muttered to myself. They were supposed to stay off, or at least on standby. Maybe a power surge from the storm. I figured I'd just turn it off when I passed it later. I went back to my work, dismissing it as a minor malfunction. But a few minutes later, the static on the TV changed. It wasn't just white noise anymore. Shapes began to form within the static, dark, shifting patterns that moved and twisted. My heart gave a little jump. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. This wasn't a power surge. This wasn't normal. The static was coalescing, forming something almost recognizable but distorted, like a corrupted image. The hissing sound grew louder, more insistent. I slowly walked towards the television, my steps quiet on the carpeted floor. My headlamp cast a weak beam onto the floor in front of me. As I got closer, the shapes on the screen became clearer, more terrifying. They were faces, distorted, ghostly faces, swirling within the static. They seemed to be screaming, their mouths open in silent, unending agony. And then, from the depths of the static, a single, raspy whisper rose, barely audible over the hissing. It was calling my name. Ben. Ben. It was a drawn-out, mournful sound filled with a terrible sadness. My blood ran cold. My body locked up. My eyes were fixed on the screen, on those screaming, ghostly faces. The whisper intensified, becoming a chorus of tortured voices, all calling my name, louder and louder. Ben! 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 The static flared, crackling violently, and the faces on the screen became horrifyingly clear. They were human faces, but contorted, their eyes wide with fear, their skin stretched thin. They looked like people trapped, trying to get out. Then, one of the faces, a woman's face with long, dark hair, pressed itself against the screen, as if trying to break through the glass. Her mouth opened in a silent scream, and then her eyes, dark and hollow, looked directly at me. A single, dark tear seemed to roll down her distorted cheek, and then her lips moved, forming a single, horrifying word. "Help!" I screamed. It was a raw, guttural sound that tore from my throat. I stumbled backward, knocking over a stack of video games, sending them clattering to the floor. I didn't care. My eyes were still fixed on the screen, on that woman's face, on those pleading eyes. The static intensified, flickering wildly, and the other faces around her pressed forward, their silent screams joining the chorus. The entire television seemed to vibrate, buzzing with an unseen, horrifying energy. I turned and ran. I didn't look back. I sprinted through the electronics department, past the darkened aisles, towards the emergency exit at the front of the store. I burst out into the stormy night, gasping, shivering, the rain soaking my clothes. I didn't stop until I reached my car, and even then I sped away as fast as I could, leaving that store, that screen, that terrifying plea behind. I quit Walmart the next day. I couldn't go back, not after that. My supervisor just shook his head, thinking I was stressed, but I know what I saw. Even now, years later, I can't watch TV alone in the dark. Every time a screen goes to static, I feel a surge of primal dread, my heart leaping into my throat. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I swear I hear a chorus of faint, mournful whispers calling my name, and I catch a fleeting glimpse of distorted faces in the reflection of my darkened phone screen, pressing against the glass, silently begging for help. That Walmart changed me. It showed me that some screens don't just display images, they're windows to places of unspeakable torment, and sometimes those trapped inside try to reach out. My name is Patricia Green. I was an overnight deli associate at Walmart for 8 years. My job was to slice meats, prepare salads, and bake fresh bread for the morning. It's a job filled with the smell of roasting chickens and fresh pastries, a warmth against the chill of the rest of the store. You're mostly alone, just the hum of the slicers and ovens for company. Most people think the deli is the safest, warmest part of the store, but even warmth can hide cold dread. The night the deli slicer turned on by itself and then sliced something that wasn't meat, I knew some things were not just human, and they had a taste for something far more sinister. It was a quiet Tuesday night around 3 a.m. I was in the back of the deli, cleaning the large industrial meat slicer. The air was thick with the lingering scent of sliced turkey and sharp cleaning solution. The deli counter lights cast a warm, yellow glow, a stark contrast to the dimness of the main store aisles. The only sounds were the soft hum of the refrigeration units and the gentle clatter of my cleaning rags. It was a normal, uneventful night, the kind I had experienced hundreds of times. As I wiped down the slicer, I heard a faint click. I paused, my hand on the machine. The slicer's power light, which had been off, suddenly glowed red. Then, with a low whine, the large circular blade began to spin. Slowly at first, then picking up speed, a dangerous, sharp whirring filling the quiet deli. My blood ran cold. My heart leapt into my throat. The slicer was off. I had turned it off and unplugged it after cleaning. I knew I had. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. This wasn't a malfunction. This wasn't possible. I stumbled backward, away from the whirring blade, my eyes wide with terror. The machine hummed with an eerie life, its sharp blade spinning faster and faster, a silver blur in the warm light. The smell of metal and a faint, acrid odor, like burnt hair, filled the air. The air around the deli counter grew noticeably colder, even though the ovens were still radiating warmth. I could feel a knot tightening in my stomach. I was alone in the deli, completely. Then I heard a soft, wet thump. It came from the slicer. As I watched, horrified, a dark, fleshy mass slowly slid onto the slicer's tray, right up against the spinning blade. It was a dark, purplish color, and it looked like meat. But not any meat I recognized. It was too thick, too irregularly shaped. And then, as the blade whirred, it began to slice. Slicing, slicing, slicing. Thin, dark strips of the fleshy mass peeled away, falling onto the collection tray below. A faint, sickening smell of old blood and something deeply metallic filled the deli, making me gag. I could hear a soft, wet squelch with each pass of the blade. This wasn't turkey. This wasn't ham. This was something else entirely. And it was being sliced, piece by gruesome piece, by a machine that had turned itself on. My breath hitched in my throat. My body was rigid with fear. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. The slicer continued its work, the blade a terrifying blur, reducing the dark, fleshy mass to thin, glistening strips. And then, as one of the strips fell, I saw it. A small, white object, like a fragment of bone, embedded in the dark flesh. It was too small to be from an animal. It looked disturbingly like a fragment of a human finger bone. My stomach lurched. A wave of nausea washed over me. I finally found my voice, a raw, choked scream that tore from my throat. I turned and ran, not caring about the mess, not caring about anything. I ran out of the deli, past the deserted bakery, past the silent aisles towards the emergency exit at the front of the store. I burst out into the cold night air, gasping, shivering, my lungs burning. I didn't stop until I reached my car, and even then I sped away as fast as I could, leaving that horrific scene behind. I quit Walmart the next day. I never stepped foot in that deli again. My supervisor just thought I had a breakdown from overwork, but I know what I saw. Even now, years later, the smell of sliced deli meat makes my stomach churn, and I can't look at a meat slicer without feeling a surge of pure dread. Sometimes, when I'm alone in my kitchen, I hear a faint, distant whirring sound, and I swear I catch a whiff of old blood and burnt hair. That Walmart changed me. It showed me that some hunger is not satisfied by ordinary food, and some machines have a will of their own, driven by something ancient and sinister. My name is Tristan Wolfe. I was an overnight stocker in the produce section at Walmart for 4 years. My job was to restock the fruits and vegetables, mist the greens, and make sure everything looked fresh. It's a cool, damp area, always smelling of fresh earth and ripe produce. You're often alone, surrounded by towering displays of colorful food. Most people think the produce section is harmless, full of natural beauty. But sometimes nature can be unsettling, especially when it's not quite natural. The night I found a vegetable that wasn't a vegetable, pulsating softly and making a sound like a heartbeat, I knew the produce section held more than just fresh food. It was a humid summer night, around 2:45 a.m. I was in the back corner of the produce section, misting the leafy greens. The air was cool and damp, thick with the earthy scent of soil and fresh produce. The only sounds were the gentle hiss of the mister and the distant hum of the refrigeration units. The rest of the store was a silent, dimly lit expanse. It was a typical night, peaceful and monotonous. As I adjusted a display of lettuce, I heard a faint, rhythmic thump, thump. It was very soft, like a muffled drum beat. I paused, listening. It seemed to be coming from the display of organic tomatoes a few feet away. I frowned. "What's that?" I mumbled to myself. Maybe the mister was vibrating oddly, or some machinery in the walls. I dismissed it, thinking it was just a strange echo in the quiet store. I continued misting the greens, but a few minutes later the sound became clearer, louder. Thump, 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 thump. It was definitely coming from the tomato display, and it sounded less like a machine and more like a heartbeat. My blood ran cold. My heart began to pound against my ribs, mirroring the sound. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. This wasn't normal. This wasn't the building settling or a trick of the mist. This was alive. I slowly walked towards the tomato display, my steps quiet on the wet floor. The air around the display felt strangely warm, almost humid, contrasting with the cool dampness of the rest of the section. The earthy smell intensified, but now it was tinged with something sickly sweet, something like decaying flesh. The rhythmic thumping grew louder, more insistent, pulsating through the floor into my feet. My hand trembled as I reached out, hesitantly, towards the pile of organic tomatoes. Then, from the very center of the display, nestled among the perfectly ripe, red tomatoes, I saw it. It was roughly the size of a grapefruit, but its color was a deep mottled purple, veined with sickly yellow. It was covered in tiny, fine hairs like bristles, and its surface seemed to pulse faintly with its own inner light, a dim, sickly green. And it was definitely thumping. That heartbeat sound was coming from it. My breath hitched in my throat. My body was rigid with fear. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. The pulsating, purple thing seemed to glow brighter, and its rhythmic thumping intensified, vibrating through the entire display. And then, from its surface, a single, thin tendril, like a root, slowly extended itself. It was a pale, translucent white, and it slowly began to snake its way through the tomatoes, searching. It looked like a feeler, sensing the air. As I watched, horrified, the tendril found a ripe tomato. It slowly, deliberately pierced the tomato's skin. A faint, sucking sound, like a soft sigh, came from the purple thing. The tomato, as the tendril entered it, seemed to shrivel slightly, its skin becoming dull and wrinkled, as if its life force was being drained away. The tendril then retracted, and the purple thing pulsed once, twice, with a new, stronger energy. My stomach lurched. A wave of pure disgust and terror washed over me. I let out a raw, choked cry of horror. I stumbled backward, knocking over a stack of fruit crates, sending oranges and apples scattering across the wet floor. I didn't care. My eyes were still fixed on that pulsating purple horror, on its probing tendril, on the shriveling tomato. The thing then emitted a low, soft gurgle, a sound that seemed to come from deep within its core, a sound of satisfaction. I turned and ran. I didn't look back. I sprinted out of the produce section, past the bakery, past the frozen foods, towards the emergency exit. I burst out into the humid night, gasping, shivering, my lungs burning. I didn't stop until I reached my car, and even then I sped away as fast as I could, leaving that store, that thing, that horrifying feeding behind. I quit Walmart the very next day. I couldn't go back, not after that. My supervisor thought I was just stressed and imagining things, but I know what I saw. Even now, years later, I can't eat organic tomatoes, and I feel a surge of primal dread whenever I see a vegetable display. Sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment, I hear a faint, rhythmic thumping sound, and I swear I catch a whiff of that sickly, sweet, decaying smell. That Walmart changed me. It showed me that some forms of life are not meant for our world, and some harvests are grown from unimaginable horrors. My name is Gregory Hunt. I was an overnight cart pusher at Walmart for 5 years. My job was to gather all the shopping carts from the parking lot and bring them back into the store. It's usually a solitary job, spent outside in the cold or rain, but you get used to the quiet hum of the night, the distant traffic. Most people think it's just pushing carts, but you see a lot in a dark parking lot. The shadows stretch, the cars become anonymous shapes, and sometimes things move that shouldn't. The night I found a cart full of something that wasn't groceries, something covered in dark, matted hair and making a faint whimpering sound, I knew some things were not just human, and they were trying to escape. It was a cold, misty night in early winter, around 1:30 a.m. I was out in the vast, empty parking lot, pushing a long train of shopping carts towards the store entrance. The mist hung heavy in the air, blurring the distant streetlights. The only sounds were the rhythmic squeak of the cartwheels and the faint, distant hum of the highway. The air smelled of damp asphalt and exhaust fumes. It was a typical, lonely night out in the parking lot. As I pushed the carts, I noticed one cart, left further away than the others, near the tree line at the edge of the lot. It looked different. Fuller. I frowned. Someone forgot their groceries, I mumbled to myself, a bit annoyed. People often left their carts in strange places. I detached my train of carts and walked towards the lone cart, expecting to find forgotten bags of food. But as I got closer, I heard a faint sound coming from the cart. A low, soft whimpering, like a small, lost animal. My heart gave a little jump. A dog, I thought. Maybe someone abandoned a puppy. My instincts gave a small tug, a feeling that something was off, but I pushed it down. I figured it was just an abandoned pet, cold and scared. I hurried towards the cart, wanting to help, but a few steps closer, the whimpering intensified, becoming a soft, desperate cry. And then I saw what was in the cart. It wasn't groceries. It was a large, dark, huddled mass covered in long, coarse, matted hair. It seemed to be moving faintly, shifting with tiny, jerky motions. It was about the size of a very large dog, but its shape was all wrong. Too lumpy, too irregular, and the hair was too long, too dark, not like any dog I had ever seen. The air around the cart felt suddenly icy cold, even colder than the misty night, and a strange, foul odor, like wet fur and something vaguely metallic, reached my nose. My blood ran cold. My heart began to pound against my ribs, a wild, desperate rhythm. My instincts were screaming that something was terribly wrong. This wasn't an animal. This was something else. The whimpering changed, becoming a low, choked gargle, like something struggling for air or struggling to speak. The dark mass in the cart began to convulse, slowly, weakly. I stopped a few feet away, frozen in place, staring at the horror in the shopping cart. The gargling sound grew louder, more desperate. The matted hair seemed to part slightly, and I caught a glimpse of something pale and sickly beneath. A patch of skin, oddly wrinkled, and then a single milky white eye, wide with fear and pain, slowly opened, staring directly at me from the depths of the dark hair. It was not a dog's eye. It was too large, too round, too human-like, yet utterly inhuman. The milky white eye blinked slowly, deliberately, and then, from the throat of the dark mass, a single word, stretched and broken, tore through the whimpering. Gree. It was a dry, raspy whisper, full of agony and something else, something primal. The dark mass then lunged forward, just an inch, towards me, its form shifting, twisting violently in the cart. The smell of wet fur and metallic decay intensified, making me gag. I screamed, a raw, desperate sound that tore from my throat. I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet, falling onto the cold, wet asphalt. I scrambled away on my hands and knees, my eyes fixed on the shopping cart. The dark, hairy mass was now thrashing violently, its milky white eye still fixed on me, its mouth, a dark gap in the hair, repeating, "Hungry, hungry." The shopping cart itself began to rock violently, shaking with the unseen force of whatever was trapped inside. I didn't wait. I got to my feet, my legs shaking uncontrollably, and ran. I ran across the parking lot, towards the store, towards any light, any safety. I didn't stop until I burst through the automatic doors, gasping, shivering, leaving that cart, that thing, that terrifying hunger behind in the misty darkness. I quit my job the very next day. I couldn't go back into that parking lot, not after that. My supervisor just thought I was overstressed and imagined things, but I know what I saw. Even now, years later, I can't walk through a parking lot at night without feeling a shiver of dread. Every time I see a lone shopping cart, I feel a surge of primal fear, my heart leaping into my throat. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I hear a faint, desperate whimpering, and I swear I catch a glimpse of a single, milky white eye staring at me from the darkness outside my window. That Walmart changed me. It showed me that some carts are not just for groceries, and some things are abandoned, but never truly lost. My name is Madeline Grant. I worked as an overnight inventory clerk at Walmart for 3 years. My job was to count every single item on the shelves, making sure our stock numbers were correct. It's a very solitary job, quiet, just you and the endless rows of products. You focus on numbers, on order. But sometimes, when you're counting, the numbers don't add up. And sometimes, what you're counting is counting you back. The night the inventory count of office supplies fell off, and then something balanced the books for me. I knew the numbers held more than just stock. It was a chilly night, around 2 a.m. I was in the office supply aisle, counting packs of pens. The aisle lights were dim, casting long shadows. The air smelled of plastic and paper. The only sound was my soft counting and the distant hum of the refrigerators. I had a clipboard and a scanner. I counted a stack of pen packs, wrote down 25. Then I noticed one pack was missing. My total was 24. Did I miscount? I wondered. I shook my head, assuming I had just dropped one somewhere. But a few minutes later, as I moved to the next shelf, the count was off again. I counted 12 packs of notebooks, but the scanner said we should have 14. 2 missing this time. My heart started to beat faster. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. This wasn't a mistake. I felt a cold prickle on my neck, like I was being watched. The air grew heavy, silent. I slowly counted the notebooks again, my fingers trembling slightly. 12 packs. Still 12. I looked up. The aisle was empty. But then, from the corner of my eye, a pale, thin hand, impossibly long, reached out from behind the shelf. It wasn't attached to a visible arm or body. It just materialized. It moved swiftly, silently. It placed 2 more packs of notebooks onto the shelf, right onto my pile. Now there were exactly 14. The hand then slowly retracted, vanishing back into the darkness behind the shelf. I gasped, a silent, choked sound. The terror was pure, absolute. The numbers were perfect. I didn't wait. I dropped my clipboard and scanner, turned, and ran. I ran faster than I ever had, out of that aisle, out of the store, into the cold night. I quit the next day. I couldn't count again. Even now, years later, I compulsively count everything. Twice, 3 times. I always feel that cold prickle on my neck. I avoid dark aisles in stores, and sometimes when I count things in my own home and the numbers are perfect, I swear I feel a fleeting brush of cold air, and I wonder if that pale, thin hand is still balancing the books, waiting for something to go missing. My name is Caspian Ward. I worked as an overnight produce stocker at Walmart for 6 years. My job was to keep the fruit and vegetable displays full and fresh. It's a job where you get used to the earthy smell of fresh produce and the cool, damp air. You're often alone, surrounded by nature's bounty. But sometimes something spoils too fast. And sometimes what spoils isn't just food, it's something else entirely. The night the oranges began to rot too quickly, I discovered a hunger that wasn't for fruit. It was a warm summer night, around 3:30 a.m. I was arranging a display of oranges. The air was cool and damp, smelling faintly of citrus. The only sounds were the quiet hum of the refrigeration units. I picked up an orange, and it was soft, already going bad. That's fast, I thought, frowning. It had just come off the truck. I tossed it into the waste bin, figuring it was just a bad batch. But a few minutes later, I found another. Then another. Whole sections of the orange display were rotting at an alarming rate, turning soft and black. My heart began to pound faster. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. The air around the display grew heavy, and a sickly, sweet, putrid smell began to rise. I heard a faint, high-pitched buzzing. I leaned closer, my breath hitched in my throat. The oranges were not just rotting. They were covered in tiny, black, insect-like things. They were like flies, but smaller, faster, and they moved with the quick, scuttling motions of spiders. They were swarming the fruit, rapidly devouring it. And as I watched, horrified, a larger, darker mass in the center of the pile shifted. It was a cluster of these black insects forming a pulsing, squirming ball. It seemed to be growing, feeding. And then, from the center of the mass, a tiny, glowing red eye, no bigger than a pinprick, pulsed open, staring directly at me. I screamed, a sound of pure terror, and stumbled backward, falling to the wet floor. I scrambled away, my eyes fixed on the display. The black mass pulsed, its red eye gleaming. The buzzing intensified, a deafening swarm of hunger. I quit Walmart the next day. I couldn't go back. Even now, years later, I can't eat oranges or any fruit that isn't perfectly sealed. I always feel a faint buzzing in my ears, and I swear I catch a glimpse of tiny, black shapes scurrying in the corner of my eye. That Walmart changed me. It showed me that some decay is not natural, and some things feed on darkness hidden in plain sight. My name is Sophia Clark. I was an overnight supervisor at Walmart for 10 years. My job was to oversee all the night operations, making sure the stockers and cleaners did their jobs, handling any issues that came up. It's a demanding role, always on your feet, always solving problems. You see the stress in people's eyes, the weariness of the long hours. But what you don't expect is for the stress to come from the building itself, from its unseen inhabitants. The night the store's intercom system started playing a distorted, childlike lullaby and then whispered a warning directly to me, I knew the walls were listening, and they had a dark message to deliver. It was a cold, early morning, around 4:15 a.m. I was in my office, a small room near the customer service desk, going over some inventory reports. The store was mostly dark, quiet, save for the distant hum of the refrigerators and the soft glow of the emergency lights. The air smelled of stale coffee and printer toner. It was a typical quiet moment before the morning rush. I was sipping my tea, looking forward to the end of my shift. Then, the store's intercom system, which usually only broadcasted music during opening hours or announcements from me, crackled to life. It didn't play a song. It played a faint, distorted lullaby. It was a simple, repetitive tune, like something a child would sing, but it sounded warped, stretched, almost mournful. It echoed through the empty aisles, making the hair on my arms stand up. I frowned. "What in the world?" I muttered. No one was authorized to use the intercom at this hour, let alone play anything. I pushed my chair back, ready to go investigate. I figured some bored stalker was playing a prank. But a few minutes later, the lullaby intensified. It grew louder, clearer, filling every corner of the vast store. And then, a child's voice, sweet but eerily flat, began to sing along with the distorted tune. "Hush now, baby, don't you cry, Mama's gonna sing you a lullaby." The words were perfectly clear, but the voice felt wrong. Too perfect, too emotionless. My heart began to pound against my ribs. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't human. The air in my office suddenly felt heavy, cold, like someone unseen had just walked in. I stood up, gripping the edge of my desk. The lullaby and the child's voice continued, echoing, vibrating through the floor. It felt like the sound was coming from everywhere at once, enveloping me. I fumbled for my walkie-talkie, my hand shaking so hard I almost dropped it. I needed to tell someone, but who would believe me? The intercom was connected to my office. I should be able to turn it off. I stared at the intercom speaker on my wall, horrified, as the lullaby continued its eerie performance. Then, the lullaby cut off abruptly. The child's voice stopped mid-verse. A sudden, chilling silence descended upon the store, so absolute it felt like the world had stopped breathing. My heart hammered in the quiet. I waited, terrified for what would come next. Then, a new voice, low and raspy, full of ancient malice, spoke from the intercom speaker directly above my head. It was no longer a child's voice. It was deep, guttural, like dry leaves crunching underfoot, but with an undercurrent of something sickly sweet, like decay. "You stay too long." The words were slow, deliberate, each syllable dripping with venom. And then a short, wet, guttural chuckle, filled with pure malevolence, followed. It sounded like something sucking on bone. My blood ran cold. My body locked up in pure, raw terror. The voice was coming from the intercom, but it felt like it was inside my head, drilling into my sanity. "Go home," it whispered, the last word drawn out, a long, sibilant hiss that coiled around me like a serpent. "Before they come for you." And then, with a sharp crackle, the intercom went dead. The silence returned, but it was a suffocating silence, pregnant with an unspoken, horrible threat. I screamed. It was a raw, choked sound that tore from my throat. I stumbled backward, knocking over my chair, sending it clattering to the floor. I didn't care. I scrambled away from the speaker, from my office, from that terrifying warning. I ran, not caring where I was going, just away from that voice, away from that place. I burst out of the emergency exit at the front of the store, gasping, shivering, into the cold, pre-dawn air. I didn't stop until I reached my car, and even then I sped away, leaving Walmart and that terrifying voice behind me forever. I quit Walmart that very morning. I couldn't go back, not after that. My regional manager thought I had a nervous breakdown, that the stress had finally gotten to me. But I know what I heard. Even now, years later, I can't listen to lullabies without feeling a surge of primal dread. And sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment, I hear a faint, distant crackle, and a low, guttural whisper seems to echo from the darkest corners of my home, warning me that I stayed too long and that something is still coming for me. That Walmart changed me. It showed me that some buildings have their own dark voices, and some warnings are meant to save you from a fate worse than death. My name is Philip Lancaster. I was an overnight janitor at Walmart for 12 years. My job was to keep the bathroom spotless, mop the spills, and make sure the whole place looked clean for the morning. It's a quiet job, often thankless, mostly spent alone with your thoughts and the hum of the cleaning machines. You get used to the strange smells, the echoes in the empty aisles. But sometimes the messes you clean aren't just dirt, and sometimes the silence reveals sounds that no one should ever hear. The night I found a strange, sticky substance in aisle 6 and heard a slurping sound from behind the shelves, I knew some things were not just human, and they were feeding in the dark. It was a quiet Wednesday night around 2:30 a.m. I was in aisle 6 near the pet food section, mopping up a spilled bag of dog kibble. The aisle lights were dim, casting long shadows. The air smelled of pet food and my industrial cleaner. The only sound was the rhythmic slosh of my mop bucket and the distant hum of the refrigerators. It was a normal, uneventful night, just another routine cleanup. As I finished mopping, I noticed a strange substance on the floor, tucked just behind a towering display of cat food. It was a dark, sticky puddle, roughly circular, about a foot wide. It wasn't water or soda or anything I recognized. It was thick, almost jelly-like, and it pulsed faintly with a dull, sickly green light from within. A strange, metallic smell, like old blood mixed with something sweet and sickly, wafted from it. I frowned, my stomach churning slightly. "What in the world is that?" I mumbled to myself. I knelt down, cautiously, to get a closer look, but as I leaned in, I heard a faint, wet, slurping sound coming from behind the cat food display. It was a slow, deliberate sound, like something large was drinking. My heart leapt into my throat. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't an animal. The slurping was too deep, too heavy. The air around the puddle felt suddenly icy cold, despite the warm, humid night. The sickly, sweet smell intensified, making me gag. I slowly stood up, my eyes wide with terror, fixed on the cat food display. The slurping continued, growing louder, more insistent, as if whatever was behind there was feeding rapidly. The green light from the puddle pulsed brighter, then faded, then pulsed again, almost in rhythm with the slurping. I fumbled for my walkie-talkie, my hand shaking so hard I almost dropped it. I needed to call my supervisor, but my throat felt tight, dry. Then, from the darkness behind the display, a thin black tendril slowly, silently extended itself. It was long and glistening, like a thick, wet root, and its tip was covered in tiny, sucking mouths. It lowered itself into the green puddle, and the slurping sound intensified, becoming a frantic, guttural gulping. The tendril then slowly retracted, dripping the dark, sticky substance, before another, even thicker, tendril pushed its way out, searching for more. My blood ran cold, my body locked up in pure, raw terror. My eyes were fixed on that horrifying tendril, on that repulsive slurping. The green puddle of light on the floor seemed to shrink slightly, slowly being consumed. The air grew impossibly cold, and the metallic, sickly sweet smell overwhelmed me. I could hear a faint, almost imperceptible whisper coming from behind the display, a low, guttural murmur that sounded like ancient satisfaction. I screamed. It was a raw, desperate sound that tore from my throat. I stumbled backward, knocking over my mop bucket, sending dirty water sloshing across the aisle. I didn't care. I scrambled away, my eyes still fixed on the display, on the dark tendrils, on the shrinking green puddle. The slurping intensified, a horrific symphony of consumption. I didn't wait. I got to my feet, my legs shaking uncontrollably, and ran. I ran out of aisle 6, past the deserted checkout lanes, past the silent electronics department, towards the emergency exit at the front of the store. I burst out into the cool night air, gasping, shivering, leaving that store, that thing, that terrifying feeding, behind me forever. I quit Walmart the very next day. I couldn't go back, not after that. My supervisor just thought I was overly imaginative from lack of sleep, but I know what I saw. Even now, years later, I can't clean a spill without feeling a surge of primal dread. Every time I see a dark, sticky stain, I feel a cold prickle on my neck, and sometimes, in the dead of night, I hear a faint, wet slurping sound, and I swear I catch a whiff of that metallic, sickly sweet odor. That Walmart changed me. It showed me that some messes are not just dirt, and some things are drawn to the shadows, feeding on whatever they can find deep within the empty aisles. Some places are cheap because the previous guests never lived to leave bad reviews.